Right. Welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We sat in on a presentation that our legislative council was giving to the House Energy Committee. And I wanted to do two things after and just say, give our committee members a chance to ask any questions they might have about your presentation. And then I would like to talk a little bit more about how that Zooming went for folks, and if you have further thoughts on how we could make that more effective or whether we should do it again. So do members have questions for Legislative Council on the Global Warming Solutions Act? Representative Morris.
Not really a question. I tried to pull up her testimony on the website.
Okay, toward the end of Ellen's presentation, it was posted, so maybe you need to hit refresh.
I hit refresh, I've logged off, gone back.
Are you on the House Energy Committee? It's not on our website.
Yeah, I was on that one and I switched into ours.
Not on ours, although we could put it there.
I will go on to energy.
It should be there now because it did show up toward the end.
We put it on ours as well.
We can, would you put it on ours? Oh, it's under Ellen? On ours? Okay, I guess Annika's already done that.
Yeah, it's like I can't get it to come up, so that's.
I'll see if I can, but are there any other substantive questions?
working.
It's not working with you, okay.
Anyone have a question? I guess, Ellen, the reason that I thought that it was important for us to get the overview is because the Global Warming Solutions Act is the foundation for the Climate Action Plan. And within the Climate Action Plan, there are the subcommittee reports and recommendations. And when you, it's worthwhile. It's a daunting document, but it doesn't have to be a daunting document. You can go in and look at their recommendations. You can look at whatever part of it you want, but I recommend you do that. A lot of the recommendations relate to our areas of jurisdiction. So it's worthwhile for us to understand that. We are not the committee that is overseeing the implementation of the Global Warming Solutions Act, like straight up. But like I just said, we are certainly part of the work that gets done to support it and in our areas of jurisdiction. And, maybe you'll have creative ideas about how to help address the issues that Climate Action Plan is trying to address that are in our area. Does that make sense? Worth looking at the Climate Action Plan in that lens of what you now know about our area of jurisdiction and our work ahead. Questions about the legalities or the presentation? Thoughts on engaging did you have any questions about the presentation?
There was one question that came up. Trying to remember what part of it was on, but something about the legality and who can bring suit and what they actually, if they win the suit, what actually happens.
Sure. So the specific provision 594 says that any person can bring a suit on two things. They can either sue the Agency of Natural Resources for failure to adopt or update the rules to help the state meet reductions, or any person can bring suit alleging that the state did miss the reduction requirement and ANR's rules or lack of rules was a substantial cause of that failure. And so those are two pretty narrow provisions. They're both related to ANR's adoption of rules. And then under that, this is, I think, the last slide of my presentation. If you pull it up, although I also can't seem to pull it up on the website.
Mine's working.
Okay, so maybe I need to refresh again. But so the remedy is in both cases, if the court finds that ANR did not properly adopt the rules or their rules were the substantial cause why we didn't reach the reduction requirements. The remedy is the court ordering A&R to adopt additional or updates to the rules. The prevailing party can also have attorney's fees awarded. So if it's a citizen, they can have their attorney's fees awarded if they win. And then A&R can have their attorney's fees paid if the court finds that it was a frivolous lawsuit. So as they were mentioning in-house energy, this is narrower than what Rule 75 is a provision that does exist in Vermont civil procedure generally. And so any person can try to bring a lawsuit if they believe an agency has failed to do their work on other issues. And the statute is not detailed on what the remedies are. And so this statute in the Global Warming Solutions Act is a narrower provision that provides some details and timelines and narrowly defines what the remedy is in that situation.
Representative Bartholomew.
So if I remember correctly and understand correctly, the only monetary settlement would be for attorney's fees. That you can't sue and say I'm damaged and, give me $5 million.
So the caveat to that, I'm not a litigator. I do think attorneys can try to ask for more. Good attorneys will try creative arguments anytime, but the statute does not specifically provide for that.
I'm talking damages.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So the statute does not provide for that. In some cases, the judge has discretion. I am not super well versed in how that works and if the court would have discretion, but in the current complaint, in the current lawsuit, they are not asking for monetary damages. So someone could try to argue that, but I don't think they would be successful because it's specific. But again, it's tricky because I don't practice enough in this area to know too much about the court procedure and awarding anything else. But the statute does not provide for that.
Who would know that answer?
I mean, you could try to have some attorneys in here. Because I have been researching some stuff lately on how things like this could play out. Because the statute does also say, so this is the thing, the statute does also say that complaints could be brought on other grounds. So if someone wanted to bring a suit saying one of the examples in the statute is under the Vermont Administrative Procedure Act, there's different procedures, like if someone wanted to claim that the rules were improperly adopted, they didn't follow those. So other statutes have different remedy provisions. So it would really depend on someone bringing a lawsuit and trying to make an argument under other statutes that are available. But under the specific citizen provision that's in this law, it is narrow. People could also try to tack on other things, I think, is what's being acknowleded.
Representative Pritchard.
Okay, and so I'm clear on reduction requirements. That's 100% of the goal, correct?
Yeah.
Not 99.5, 99.9.
What do you mean?
The reduction requirements as far as the
Emission?
Yeah, as far as the emission.
Mhm.
I mean, that's one complying with 100% of that number, correct?
So yeah, the specific amounts are provided for in the statute.
No, I realize
Yes.
that the reductions amounts, but what I'm saying, if that's not met, it has to be met 100%,
Yes.
unless that, okay.
Yes. The citizen supervision does say that the court could find that A&R is actively working on additional rules. And so if there's some leeway for the court to say, okay, well, you did miss the deadline, but A&R has been actively working and taking action, so they're not the cause of missing. So there's some room there, but yes, if the emissions reductions are not met for the 2025 deadline, a person may bring a lawsuit.
I found that I was struck because having just gotten the briefing from Michael Grady and then John Groveman today that, the federal statute also has the right of citizen action. And I think for the Clean Water Act, and it's much broader than this. And as you've pointed out, that right exists without us talking about it in statute anyway. And so it's very interesting to me that this is a kind of a lightning rod. Representative Tagliavia.
The situation you just talked about, if there is a suit, or, and say A and R makes an argument that they're in progress, that yes, they are late, and the judge finds for A and R. Does that still leave the state of Vermont A and R open to losses for attorney's fees and everything else? Or potentially, could it?
Potentially, yes. And it would depend on what the judge said in their ruling.
Great. Well, thank you, Alan. Representative North.
I know I came in late, apologize for that. Question, just for my clarification, I think you made it clear, but I just wanted to make sure I understood that the what's being measured and required to be reduced is purely emissions. We're not taking any sequestration into account. In other words, it's not a net number. It's only the emissions side of the equation that we're looking at, not emissions minus sequestration to come up with a net value. Is that true, or did I misunderstand?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'd have to look into it.
Because there's a lot, we heard earlier today.
Yeah.
A lot of great work being done to sequester.
So what I mentioned at the beginning was that I am interested in our areas of jurisdiction, in particular, looking to recommendations in the climate action plan. And I think I'll be curious to hear the answer to your question. It's a great question. Certainly in there, we talk about natural solutions, which we've already started to talk about in this committee, you know, and enhancing the ability of our forests to be carbon storage areas. And and different ways we can do that. So that's kind of the angle we're in this on. And I'll be interested to hear the answer.
So I think, whether or not Vermont has complied with its obligation would be reflected in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and ANR publishes that. And so what I'm not entirely certain of is if the requirement is that Vermont has to reduce its emissions, and there is that amount. It does translate on that chart to a specific amount of million megawatt tons. And so I just don't know off the top of my head in calculating that if they do take, I think they do take sequestration into account, but you may want to hear from ANR about how they actually do that work.
Yes. Yeah, that would be good. Representative Tagliavia.
If that's not the case, if sequestration is not taken into account right now, could that be considered a flaw in the legislation the way it sits right now because of the possibility of natural sequestration? And if, you know, just say for instance, whatever the number is of our emissions, if some of the emissions are being naturally sequestered, say 50%, just for an argument's sake, couldn't that be considered a flaw and it need to be revisited?
It's sort of, so that's our discretion. So we are the policy writers. I don't think that's a question for our ledge council. It's up to us to decide if that's something we would want to do. That's not, you know what I mean? There's subjectivity involved.
I was just thinking in terms of a lawsuit, a standing lawsuit right now.
Yeah.
So this kind of came up before. I mean, challenging a law that has been adopted is not the easiest thing to do. It's not the easiest thing to bring a lawsuit. Just so like that the legislature adopted it this way. I just don't happen to know off the top of my head how that works, but generally lawsuits aren't brought based on whether or not a law is flawed or not, because that really is sort of subjective. And so if the General Assembly does find that they think something is missing, or there's something that additional needs to be done, just like Representative Sheldon said, that's what the legislature does.
Just follow my question, and then how are these quantities measured? Is that defined in the law, or is that left up to ANR to define? And if it is defined, is that detailed out somewhere so we can kind of see that?
Yes, actually, and I didn't really have a chance to discuss this in depth, but I did mention a few times the greenhouse gas inventory and forecast. So it is directly tied to the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that is a separate statute. It's in 10 VSA 582, and it does have information on how ANR is to go about collecting the data, compiling the data, and analyzing the data in order to publish this report on what are the current, or what are the emissions based on the sectors for a given year. And they also provide a forecast based on what is happening. So that is spelled out in 582 to some extent. There was an additional amendment made to it. And so additional language has been added over time to clarify some of that, but it is in the statute.
I'd be very interested to know, like, how do you know how much transportation gases are emitted? Is it based on miles driven by cars? Is it based on the gasoline that's sold, or are they running around with like measurement devices measuring
Well, so that's
tailpipes? Or-
that is why that's why there's a time lag, because collecting data from different sources does take a while. And so it is a combination of in-state data and data from the federal government.
A little bit like the phosphorus question that we had. I think it is, yeah, it's an interesting. Well, maybe. I don't know. I'd like to know how they do it too. So, yeah. Great. Thank you, Ellen. I think we're all set. Then it's not really, I guess I'm just curious what people's response is to the joining by Zoom. Yeah, it was okay.
Especially with this opportunity to ask questions.
This actually worked out incredibly well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
she doesn't have to present everything 3-4 times.
Yeah, great. That's the intention for sure. John.
I think I personally would prefer being in the same room in a joint session, particularly if it's an issue that's going to demand a lot of public attention, because it just looks better to the public when, all of us are there. It appears like there are more people in the legislature paying attention to an issue that is of importance to Vermonters. Whereas here, yeah, we're all engaged, but who can tell?
Can tell. And then I asked Annika to look into making sure we could ask questions and participate. Representative Logan.
Are you asking, because otherwise we need to reserve a room in the pavilion for?
Yeah, the logistics of the joint hearing, which is not, it's something we do and we will be doing joint hearings. But yeah, it just takes more time. And I was looking for this and then Ellen said, well, I'm giving the same talk, why not? And I thought, well, why not just join? So try it out in a simpler fashion. Although I'm hearing Representative Bartholomew, it is probably better if we can all be together. But that requires just a lot more planning than the first week of session allowed for. Representative Austin.
I just, last session, when education and Ways and Means had a lot of meetings together, I really liked that because one, it developed relationships with those members. So you felt more kind of comfortable approaching them, and you knew you had the same body of information, you would receive the same body of information. So I think it's very helpful, and I think, again, on Ledge Council, it's nice when they don't have to do 4 different presentations. But I also think there's this culture that starts to get built between the committees of jurisdiction that's helpful to facilitate the process.
Yeah. I think we'll be trying to do that as much as we can. We're trying for next week to join Senate Natural in the pavilion with a Vermont Conservation Design presentation, for example. So we will try to do that. Did you have something? No. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a clear hierarchy of what's best in terms of engagement with speaker and with Ledge Council, and being present in the same room is a huge step up. But I don't want to say we can't do it, but I will just observe for myself. I really had a hard time feeling engaged in that. But I think it's an important tool to utilize when it really makes sense.
One thing you mentioned, which is important, is if we had seen Ellen's face up there instead of just the words, and if we'd had earlier access to the words, could have just followed those ourselves, and then if Ellen was up there, it'd be like she's in the room. So that is just fine tuning. Yeah. All right, Representative Labor.
Thank you. Just to go back to carbon sequestration, we've heard from presenters that the young forest is a healthy forest that absorbs or sequesters more carbon rather than a forever forest. When you look at the state of Vermont, they say 10 to 20,000 acres are removed from the forest per year, mostly for development. It's strange that is contradicting what the foresters are saying. They're saying, at least in our part of the kingdom, we're at 76%. So if we're exceeding our growth rate by 4%, which is the current estimate over the cut rate. So if the growth rate is 4% higher than the cut rate, how can you lose 10 to 20,000 acres per year? In terms of owning a forest and the rules or laws that we're propagating, I see very little equity in that, not getting the credit for the carbon that you're sequestering. This food is on.
Go back to the question, I'm okay with the Zoom meeting.
Great. All right. Thank you all. With that, we will adjourn for the afternoon and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9.